Rookie cop disrespects veteran detective, instantly regrets it. Phones were ringing, laptops were clacking, and there was a slight odor of stale coffee that lingered in the air. The precinct was bustling with the typical hectic energy that can be found there. In the midst of a sea of uniforms and suits, Officer Jake Carter, the rookie with a fresh face, walked in as if he owned the place. Jake had already established a reputation for being arrogant, brash, and a bit too eager to prove himself, and this was just 6 months after he had graduated from the academy training program. Although he did not have any scars to back up his claims of grandeur, he exuded the confidence of someone who believed he was destined for greatness. Detective Frank Malone was located at the other end of the room, where he was doing his work at a desk that was so cluttered that it seemed to have survived a storm. Malone, a grizzled veteran who had served for more than 25 years on the police, was a celebrated figure inside the department. His ability to solve problems was unparalleled. His instincts were razor sharp, and he had neither the patience nor the tolerance for bullshit. Even while he was the sort of law enforcement officer who could look down on a hardened criminal without blinking, he was also the kind of officer who would discreetly purchase a dinner for a homeless man without telling anybody about it. The foundation of his reputation was not fear, but rather respect, which was something that Jake had not yet fully grasped. It was a luxury that most rookies would kill for, and Jake had been given the responsibility of shadowing Malone for the day. But Jake did not view things in that light. Malone, in his view, was nothing more than an antiquated relic, a dinosaur who was incapable of comprehending the current police system. Even though he had heard the stories, he was under the impression that they were nothing more than tales. Exaggerated stories created with the intention of making the veteran seem more amazing than he really was. In the process of approaching Malone's desk, Jake did not make any effort to conceal his smile. It was with a tone that was oozing with disdain that he remarked, "So, you're the famous Detective Malone. It has been said a lot about you. It's up to me to decide whether or not the legend lives up to the hype." While Malone was examining the case file, he did not even glance up from what he was doing. The tone of his voice was low and gravelly as he said, "Carter, right? Take a seat. Also, get rid of that attitude. It is not your goal to impress anybody. You are here to learn." Despite rolling his eyes, Jake sat down in the chair. Malone was going over the specifics of a cold case, which was a missing persons file that had been collecting dust for years. He spent the next hour squirming as Malone went over the information so painstakingly. To Jake, it seemed to be a pointless use of his time. The question that he eventually blurted out was, "Why are we even looking at this? This case dates back to the past. We need to be out there capturing the actual criminals, don't you think?" After putting the file down in a deliberate manner, Malone locked Jake with a gaze that could effectively freeze lava. It was in a voice that was dangerously calm that he questioned, "You think this is a waste of time? Who is that young lady in the picture?" She was 17 years old. The woman had a family, aspirations, and a future. And it is possible that someone is aware of what transpired with her. However, because you do not find her to be exciting enough, let's simply forget about her for the time being. In an attempt to respond, Jake opened his lips, but Malone interrupted him. "You think you're very cool since you did so well at the academy, don't you? Kid, allow me to share something with you. It is not the purpose of policing to go after criminals and have your name published in the newspaper. Fairness is the issue here. It's about not caring all that much. As of right now, you are demonstrating to me that you do not." Everyone in the room was pretending not to listen, but was really paying attention to every word that was being spoken. Despite the fact that Jake's face was ablaze with humiliation, Malone was not finished. "Do you want to demonstrate your worth? That's fine. See what you have to offer, shall we?" Malone hurled a pile of documents onto the desk in front of him. These are instances from the last 10 years that have not been solved. Choose one. It might be anybody. And find a solution to it. After a moment of hesitation, Jake reached for a file at random. It was a burglary case from 5 years ago. A theft from a jewelry shop, and there were no leads involved. This one, he responded, attempting to convey an air of self-assurance. Malone gave a little nod. You have a whole day to react. I want to test you to see whether you are as good as you believe you are. It was a frenzy for the next 24 hours. Jake became involved in the investigation with the intention of demonstrating that Malone was incorrect. After conducting interviews with witnesses and reviewing surveillance video, he even managed to locate the business owner, who had retired at that point in time. However, the more he delved, the more he became aware of how incomplete his knowledge was. The investigation seemed to be a maze of dead ends and queries that were left unanswered. During this time, Malone observed Jake from a distance, remaining silent save for the odd shake of his head in response to Jake's beginner blunders. Jake had reached the point where he was both fatigued and irritated by the time the clock ran out. Still, he had not solved the mystery. It was not even close to being true. Which is, Malone inquired about the time that Jake had finally shown at the station. Jake let out a dejected sigh. My inability to find a solution. Malone gave a little nod, not rudely. That's good. It is now clear to you what it is like to be unsuccessful. Additionally, you are now aware of the reason why we do not give up on cases, regardless of how old they are. Embarrassed, Jake peered down below. In a low voice, he expressed his regret. I had no idea what it was before. However, I do now. A clap was given to him by Malone on the shoulder. You've just taken the first step, child. So, let's go to work right now. There is still a girl out there, and we are not yet finished searching for her. That day marked the beginning of Jake's shift in mindset. He began to pay more attention to what was being said, to speak less, and to treat the work with the respect that it deserved. And it was under Malone's direction that he started to develop into the type of law enforcement officer he had always envisioned himself to be, not just a good one, but a great one. In regard to Malone, it was the last time he ever brought up the event. Malone would sometimes offer Jake a little nod of approval once he solved a difficult case or went the extra mile for a victim. However, this was only very seldom the case, and it was more valuable to Jake than any medal or honor he could have received, mostly due to the fact that, in the end, it was not about being the greatest. It came down to doing what was morally correct. This was a lesson that Jake would remember for the rest of his professional life at the very least. After a few months had gone, Jake Carter showed no signs of being the brash rookie that he had been when he had first entered the department. He wasn't the same officer anymore. He was a far better cop. His days were spent following Malone about, taking up every ounce of knowledge that the seasoned investigator had to give that he could. In spite of the fact that the data appeared to lead in a different direction, he learned to trust his gut instincts, to read people, and to pay attention to the silences that occurred between their remarks. Most significantly, however, he gained a sense of humility. Jake was not an exception to Malone's ability to humble people, without breaking them, and Malone had a way of doing. On a dreary Tuesday afternoon, the precinct received a call that would alter the course of events dramatically. Out on the outskirts of the city, a corpse had been discovered inside of a warehouse that had been abandoned. There was no identification on the victim, who was a young lady in her early 20s. There was just one gunshot wound to the head, and there were no evidence of fighting. On the wall, there was a mysterious message written in blood that said, "The past never stays buried." The site was a bleak one. There was a case that Malone and Jake were assigned to during the time that they were standing in the warehouse with the broken windows and the rain tapping on them. Jake had a shudder that ran down his spine. It seems as if this lawsuit was more of a personal matter than anything else. He had no explanation for it, but there was a palpable sense of discomfort in the air. Malone squatted down next to the corpse, his keen eyes scrutinizing every aspect of the situation. He mumbled, "This wasn't a random occurrence. There was a message in this." "But who is it for?" Jake wore a frown. "Do you believe that it is connected to something more significant?" Malone gave a little nod. "The situation is familiar to me. Someone who has done this previously is responsible for the message, the accuracy of the murder, and everything else about it. And they are not yet finished." As the investigation progressed, the case took a sinister turn. A college student named Sarah Collins, who had been reported missing 2 weeks previously, was recognized as the person who had been murdered. Her accounts on several social media platforms created an image of a young lady who was brilliant, ambitious, and had a love for journalism. In contrast, her last message, which was dated on the day before she vanished, was cryptic. "I believe I discovered something significant. Investigate Blackwater Industries in the event that anything were to happen to me." Industries known as Blackwater. A shock entered Jake's body as he heard the word. It was a broad conglomerate with connections to a wide range of industries, from technology to real estate, and it was one of the largest firms in the city. Everyone believed that they were untouchable, but they were not. While Malone was reading the message, his jaw became more tense. Things have just become a whole deal more tricky. In the course of the inquiry, they fell into a rabbit hole that was filled with danger, cover-ups, and corruption. Every lead that they pursued seems to disappear into thin air immediately. In addition to the disappearance of evidence, witnesses were reticent, and they discovered that they were being followed by unmarked automobiles at every turn. It was obvious that someone did not want them to go too deeply into the matter. Malone approached Jake with a gloomy face one evening as he was sitting at his desk, going over the papers he had been working on. During the conversation, he threw a folder onto the desk and said, "We have a problem." Inside were photographs of Jake, including him leaving his apartment, going out to get coffee, and even going to see his mother. Someone was keeping an eye on him. The contents of Jake's gut churned. "What the hell is I looking at?" Malone hushed his voice and leaned in closer. "The youngster, you are getting too near to me. Their goal is to frighten you away from them." Jack clenched his hands tightly. "To be honest, it's not going to work." "We are not going to back down." Malone looked at him for a little minute before nodding his head. "That's good. In spite of this, we need to exercise caution. It is not merely a murderer that we are fighting against. One of our adversaries is a system. On top of that, if we are going to bring them down, we are going to want evidence." Unexpectedly, the breakthrough was brought forth by its origin. A flash drive that had been concealed in Sarah Collins's dorm room had been left behind by her. It was filled with hours of taped conversations, papers, and photographs, all of which pointed to a major conspiracy that included Blackwater Industries. The corporation had been illegally dumping hazardous trash in low-income communities, covering up the health catastrophes that had resulted from this practice, and suppressing anybody who attempted to expose the company's actions. The narrative had been on the verge of being revealed by Sarah. Far too near. After gathering all of the evidence, Malone and Jake presented their case before the district attorney. But the battle was not yet done, even at that point. The attorneys representing Blackwater were quite vicious, and their influence extended to a significant portion of the city's power structure. Despite the fact that it took many months of court fights, late nights, and near misses, justice was eventually realized. After the arrest of Blackwater's chief executive officer and the subsequent dismantling of the organization, the relatives of the victims started to glimpse a ray of hope. Jake found himself in the position of standing on the roof of the precinct, gazing out over the skyline of the city after the event had concluded. Malone came over and joined him, lighting a cigarette, and took a deep pull himself. In an effort to break the stillness, Malone replied, "You did a good job, kid." The skull of Jake was shaken. "We performed well. Without you, I would not have been able to survive." Malone let out a giggle. "You're not the inexperienced person who came into this place half a year ago. You have everything it takes to succeed. In any case, try not to let it go to your head." Jake wore a grin. "There are no guarantees." Jake had a feeling of purpose that he had never experienced before as they stood there taking in the sights and sounds of the city below them. He was no longer only a law enforcement officer, a guardian, a seeker of truth, and a warrior for justice. He was all three of these things. In addition, he was certain that he would persevere through whatever difficulties that awaited him with the same tenacity and will that Malone had instilled in him. The reason for this is because, in the end, it was not about the glory or the badge. The individuals that they served, those who were unable to defend themselves, were the focus of their efforts. For him, there was a purpose that was worthy of devoting his whole life to. Is this an end, or is it only the beginning?